And Polly Toynbee is a Guardian columnist, and Hendry is SNP for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey. He speaks for the party on issues of on international trade. Lots to talk about: Tory leadership, heat, lack of ambulances, whatever you like. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, firefighters have been tackling hundreds of wildfires across England during record-breaking heat in the UK. Temperatures have reached 40.3 degrees Celsius. A major incident has been declared in several parts of the country, including London and South Yorkshire. Tim Turner lives on a street in Barnsley where 5 houses have been alight this afternoon.
It's knocked everyone really for six around here because everyone's in a very close community and everyone knows everyone. But one of the houses is an old chap in his 80s. He does a lot of garden furniture and he's lost everything, all his tools, all his garden furniture.
The heat has also caused major disruption to train passengers. The body of a teenager has been recovered from the River Thames after a 14-year-old went missing near Richmond yesterday. Elsewhere, a swimmer is still missing at sea close to Clacton Pier in Essex. Kemi Badenoch has been knocked out of the race to replace Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss go into the final ballot tomorrow. And around 1 million NHS staff are getting a pay rise of at least £1,400. Meanwhile, police officers are getting a close to 5% increase. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 73 points at 72.96. The pound buys $1.20 and €1.17. LBC weather: heavy showers moving eastwards across England tonight. Rain also moving into the far southwest. A low of 10 for Scotland, but 20 degrees for some parts of eastern England. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. If you haven't phoned in yet, why not? The number is 0345 6060 973. If you want to put a question to our panel, you can text your question to 84850, and you can, of course, watch us on Global Player, and maybe you'll find out which 3 people on this panel are wearing shorts. We have with us Alec Shelbrooke, Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell. He's backing Liz Truss for the Tory leadership. Charlie Rowley is former special advisor to Theresa May when she was Prime Minister, and latterly with Michael Gove. Polly Toynbee writes for The Guardian, and Hendry is SNP MP for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, and he's their spokesman on international trade. Lots to talk about tonight. Looking forward to hearing your questions. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's crack on with our first question. It's from Alex in Watford. Hi, Alex.
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. Who the hell gave the right for Boris Johnson to remove the whip from Tobias Ellwood? The man's a war hero. It's outrageous. He's a caretaker Prime Minister. Does the panel agree with me?
Well, I suppose I ought to point out that, as a matter of fact, it was the Chief Whip who withdrew the whip from Tobias Ellwood. I'm not sure you can state 100% that it was Boris Johnson's decision, because that would normally be a decision for the whips. Alec Shelbrooke, am I right?
Yes, I mean, it's really unfortunate, Iain, and I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm not in the whip's office, but a confidence vote is the holiest of holies. It is about whether your government's going to survive or not. I don't think there's been an instance since 1924. I think I heard that if a government's lost a confidence vote, that it doesn't go to a general election. And as I understand it, and as I say, I'm not in the whip's office, that there were people who couldn't be there last night and were paired off and did phone ahead. So I'm not sure what's happened, but Tobias could have stayed out there legitimately.
Well, there were 12 people who were out of the country. 11 of them were paired, and he couldn't get back because there were no flights. Now, the conspiracy theorists among people are saying, well, this is because Boris Johnson wants Liz Truss to win because he was a Penny Mordaunt supporter, so that reduces her vote by 1. Now, you can see the logic of that, can't you?
Well, With the 357 people voting, I really can't, really. I think conspiracy theories are ripe at this time. And I think...
I should just explain that if you lose the whip, you then can't vote in the leadership election.
But I think there's 59 votes in play tomorrow, and Penny is actually still 6 votes ahead of...
But if she was one behind Liz Truss tomorrow, there'll be a lot of very, very unhappy people.
Well, very possibly, and I mean, there's every possibility the results tomorrow, and choose them in the order you want, could be 120, 119, 118, and these things are that close. But, let's go back to the start, Ian. It is a decision of the Chief Whip. Other people were away, they were paired. As I understand it, I'm not in the Whip's office, as I understand it, that Tobias made no effort to get paired, as I understand it, and left no message that he would be missing that vote. I'm not there, but that's as I understand the situation.
Polly Toynbee.
I don't know. This party's full of dirty tricks and plots and knife stabbings. Goodness knows.
After the last week, how can you possibly allege such a thing?
I'm willing to believe any conspiracy theory because it's all out there in the Tory press. There they all are, assassinating each other. Absolutely fascinating for outsiders. So it's quite possible, as you say, one vote might be in it. Tobias Ellwood, not favourite anyway. Good opportunity. Give him a whacking. I mean, this is a party out of control and losing its mind. So why not?
Charlie Rowley, is it a party that's out of control? And does this withdrawing the whip from Tobias Ellwood demonstrate that? I mean, it's not as if the whip hasn't been withdrawn from quite a lot of people over the past couple of years.
Well, I think Polly should stop being so kind to us Tories and say what she really thinks. But I think, look, if you get
me yet.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think, look, if we go back to the very start of Boris's term in office, the idea to get Brexit done, that's the one thing, the one manifesto commitment that we had to achieve.
Except it's not done.
There were a number of...
Let's not go there yet.
There were a number of MPs at the time, I remember, that didn't, when he first became Prime Minister, before that election, that were expelled from the party. So there is...
Greg Clark being one of them, who's now back in the Cabinet.
Exactly.
Who'd have thought?
Exactly. In my old office. So there is form on this front, but like Alex said, I mean, I wasn't there. I'm further removed from the building than what Alex is.
Was it a politically wise thing to do?
Boris is Boris. He will be.
Do you think it was then Boris Johnson that was behind this?
I think if it wasn't Boris himself, I'm sure there would be a number of people that would have said, you're the Prime Minister right until the day that you stop becoming Prime Minister. It is your prerogative to take these decisions or instruct the Chief Whip to withdraw the whip from individuals that don't vote. As Alex said, to be fair, a vote of confidence in the government is quite a significant vote to miss. I don't know why he wasn't paired. I don't know how that didn't come to pass, as the other 11 were able to do so. But
it's the sort of thing you have to wait to read Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times to find out exactly what happened, isn't it? Drew Hendry, Polly's obviously looking on at this with a sense, a bit of glee. I don't think that's
Well, I'm quite alarmed about the state of the country, but that aside, yes.
You the same?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the fact is that Boris Johnson, at the moment, he shouldn't be, but he's the Prime Minister. He appointed the whips. I've absolutely no doubt that if he wants something done, he would just say it and it would happen. So I think that's just a matter of fact that would be the case. The other thing you said is this government that's out of control. It absolutely is. It's a party that's out of control. It's a government that's out of control. In Westminster just now, there's the situation where as an MP, we would normally expect departments to be able to return on normal queries over, say, pensions, over passports, over other issues of the day, to get a response within, say, 15 days. They had a kind of guarantee that they would get back in those kinds of times. Sometimes it was 20 days. It's now months for individual MPs to get responses.
But why would this have an impact on a letter going back to an MP on a pensions issue?
Well, because I think it just shows how dysfunctional the government has become. If you don't have a party that's under control, you certainly can't have a government that's under control.
Are you finding that, Alec?
No, there are some departments. There are some departments where there have been unacceptable delays. That's been going on for a long time, especially Treasury, which is very much overwhelmed with the various things that has happened. But I mean, all the ministerial positions are filled. People are. It is functioning. A new government will be in place in September, but I mean, there are problems in getting letters back from some departments, no doubt about that. And it's not unusual to see members raise a point of order on the floor of the House to say how long it's been. But it's been quite a while since that happened. It is sort of an ongoing thing. All MPs get frustrated. I get frustrated at the time it can take to get responses. And I think on average...
You get quite angry on the floor of the House, don't you? I've seen you.
Once or twice. Once or twice.
It's a West Ham supporter for you.
But Alex's point seems to me very important in that it's not just MPs not getting answers to their letters, which they should within a fixed amount of time. But, the general public is finding nothing's working. They're trying to go on holiday, they can't get a passport. I was talking to somebody the other day from Chichester who had to drive all the way to Newport. When he got to Newport, he was told, no, his passport isn't here, it's in Glasgow. This kind of dysfunction. There are all these lorry drivers that we need waiting for their licences from the DVLA.
You can't blame that on the politician, though, can you? That is incompetence in the passport office.
It's incompetence by the people who run it, and that's the politicians.
It's run by the civil service, it's not run by a
But it's an agency.
It's a government department.
Go on.
It's sort of one step removed, isn't it?
Well, not very removed. Ministers are responsible for every single function of government one way or another. Some of it's a little bit arm's length, but if something isn't working, a minister steps in and says, I'm going to make this work. This hasn't been working for ages, and DVLA has been a disaster for ages. These are things that are so basic to basic running of any government. It's not ideological, it's just inept, inefficient and useless.
Don't get me started on the DVLA, but there we are. I'm not going to go back to you, Alex, because I think we got your opinion in the way you expressed the question. So let's go to Avril in Northampton. Avril, hello, what would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening. I was just wondering if the panel felt that perhaps the events of the last 2 days in terms of the temperatures would maybe refocus two of the three remaining candidates' views on the environment. I know that Liz and Penny were both sort of likely to sort of maybe row back a little bit on the energy levies, the green levies, that sort of stuff. Rishi wasn't, but do you think there might be a bit more of a focus going forward?
Charlie?
I think there probably needs to be. So I am in favour of the net zero target. I'm in favour of environmental issues. We've got to tackle these issues for the future. We can't sit around waiting for another 10 years to have record heats and a winter chill for others to jump on the bandwagon and then say, aha, we've got a climate problem. We really do. And I think if you need to appeal not just to people in the north and the south, not people on large incomes and small, you need to appeal to both ends of the age spectrum, young and old. And it is there is a huge movement, a youth movement that is really committed to environmental issues because it is really important to them. So I think, as a Conservative, I'm a compassionate Conservative, I'm a Green Tory, I think we absolutely do need to make sure that we are addressing the issues that are important to young people, particularly on the environment.
So why has climate change and the environment played such little part in this leadership campaign so far?
I think if you are guided by surveys and opinion polls, it's not one that traditionally scores high up with Tory voters. It's usually low.
Let me give you another
spending on defence.
It's because most Tory MPs don't care about this as much as they do about sending people to Rwanda.
And they should, because it might be unfashionable, but I don't understand why people get so exercised about wanting to spend so much money to send people to Rwanda, because you've got to pay for the flight, you've got to pay for the hotels and accommodation and all the rest of it, but people won't be prepared to spend the money on environmental issues to protect people for the future, the most vulnerable, as we're seeing today. We're seeing the real effects of climate change, the absolute extreme heats. We need to deal with it.
True.
Well, if it hasn't focused their minds, it's pretty late in the day. It should have focused their minds. This is a climate emergency. That we heard on your news break just before we started this programme about fires breaking out and people losing their homes. That's a tangible result of climate change. This isn't a matter of doubt. This is a matter of scientific fact that we're getting to these temperatures. And it's past time when this should have been taken seriously. It's past time when it should have been treated as the emergency it is. And it's past time that real measures should have been taken to address this. But yet, time and time again, I've sat in the House of Commons and Parliament and things like the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, getting reports back from the Climate Change Committee saying that the government isn't doing enough, not doing enough fast enough. It's not making the rush to electricity. They've got this long kind of kicking into the long grass approach to doing it, saying, we'll solve it with nuclear further down the line in terms of energy use, instead of making the transition now and setting in train the just transition that we need.
Are these matters devolved?
Some of the Westminster holds all the powers over energy policy, for example. In Scotland, we have declared a climate emergency. In Scotland, we put, for example, £500 million into a just transition fund to transition away from oil and gas into renewables. The UK government's not only failed to match that, it's refused to match that and to do anything meaningful. We've seen things like the Acorn project for carbon capture and storage being turned down time and time again. But even though it's by far the best prospect for that and is key to achieving our climate change goals, and yet that's just been ignored. Okay. So we need those powers in Scotland in order to make the kind of meaningful change that should be made.
And to get them, obviously you need a referendum. You missed a trick there. You could have added that on the end.
You've added it for me.
Polly Toynbee.
Well, it took Alec Shelbrooke threatening to resign if whoever becomes the next Prime Minister doesn't absolutely stick to the climate targets as they are. And that pulled them all back into line, particularly Kemi Badenoch, who had said, this was unilateral.
I think she was the only one that needed pulling back into line.
Except the others were not interested. I mean,
but they were all committed to net zero.
They were nominally, but did they put it up front? And when Liz Truss talks about 30 billion tax cuts, is she thinking in terms of what investments needed in order to get to the 2050 target? No, of course she's not. It's nowhere near the top of her agenda, nor was it top of Rishi Sunak's, and it was actually Boris Johnson was slightly more green than he was. But I mean, the Tories do this.
Something nice you said about Boris Johnson.
I know. Well, these are all relative. I mean, you've got to remember that David Cameron hugged Huskies, came to power saying, "Vote blue, go green." Green painted the green oak tree green, and then said, "Cut the green crap," when it turned out it cost a bit of money. I mean, absolutely backed off the whole thing. It was all a charade, and I fear that for most Tories, green is very low on the agenda.
Alec.
Well, what a load of old guff I've just heard around this table. I mean, quite frankly, on the one hand, people have a popular saying you've been in power 12 years, what you're doing. And in that 12 years, carbon emissions in this country have more than halved. Most of the coal-fired power stations are being switched off. There is the target for net zero by 2050. None of the candidates saying they're going to remove that. Renewables have been massively expanded in this country to the point where there are times when it's representing far above 50% of the electricity generation that we're doing. And we have had a solid agenda for the good time we're here. I think what we have to also look at, don't get me wrong, Iain, it is a very important subject and it's one which has to be addressed properly. The science has to be understood as well. You can't just have renewables. You have to be able to speed up and slow down turbines to maintain a base load. That means you've got to somehow spin a turbine, which you have control over. So that means boiling water, quite frankly. But let's just look across into Europe, and I'm not talking about the EU, I'm just looking into Europe. I'm looking at Germany, turning back on coal-fired power stations, burning lignite, one of the dirtiest coals in Europe. The fact that in order to get the COVID recovery fund, the 700 billion COVID recovery fund in the European Union, Hungary and Poland got them to drop all of the legal commitments that they had to make to climate change and those targets there. So there's no targets across Europe
But talking of legal commitments, the government has been found by the High Court this week to be failing in its targets and actions. Now, that's quite something, isn't it?
Yes, and what I'm saying is that but we've still gone a hell of a long way, and it shows how much further there is to go. But to suggest that nothing has happened and that this government in the last 12 years we've been in power hasn't done anything about climate targets, as if this is some great newsflash, simply isn't true. We are leading the way on the European continent. Of all of the countries there, many of them are taking a step back. I really regret the fact that we're not like France with so many nuclear power stations in place. I really regret the fact that Germany took the decision to turn off their nuclear power stations because of what happened in Fukushima. And I regret the fact that we haven't built those power stations. But I remember back in 2010 that the idea of suggesting a nuclear power station was absolutely condemned. I remember Zach Goldsmith, who's now the minister in charge, writing pamphlets saying that it wasn't net zero carbon, you shouldn't be building it, was the wrong way forward. Now they're in favour. That is wasted time. I'm willing to put my hands up to that and say that is wasted time. Those things should have been happening a long time ago.
Avril, great question. Thank you very much. We'll come to more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. It's 19 minutes minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 21 minutes past 8 on LBC. Our cross-question panel is with us until 9 o'clock. We have Alec Shelbrooke, Polly Toynbee, Charlie Rowley, Andrew Hendry. 0345 6060 973. We've got an email question from Jim who says, is there an argument that if young people over the last 10 or 20 years had the ability to buy homes, as the previous generations had the luxury of, we would not have such an epidemic of homes being uninsulated, having ancient heating, cooling systems and not utilising green energy such as wind or solar? Statistically, younger generations care more about climate change, yet the older generations own the properties, charge enormous rents and refuse to invest that rent into making properties greener in favour of profit. Are we letting young people down with our current approach? Well, let's put that to the youngest member of the panel, Charlie Rowley.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And coming from the Department for Housing, it is important, obviously, to build more homes anyway to allow young people to get onto the housing ladder, but you have to ensure that those homes are properly insulated. That's the only way in which is going to tackle some of the climate problems that we're talking about. But I know, I do agree.
Do you think there is a generational divide here where anyone sort of under the age of 35 thinks one way and anyone, well, maybe sort of over 35, but quite a bit over 35, thinks a very different way? And that's quite a problem, isn't it, for a political party to bring forward policies that can please everybody?
Well, I'm 32, before you ask.
I wasn't going to ask. But...
And no, I think...
Do you own your own home?
I don't. No, I'm a renter. You have to have a housing market that accommodates everybody because, there are some people... I think we moved away somewhat from having a job, living in your community and living in the same area and progressing. There are some young people that like to move around. There are people that travel the world. There are people that aren't as rooted in communities as they used to be. However, you need to ensure that with levelling up, providing that it is maintained, that people can stay local and go far, and that includes being able to own your own home.
Polly.
I think these are two different questions, really. I mean, there's a real problem about young people not being able to own their own homes. But that's a bit different to the question of, that we have 19 million homes in this country that need to be insulated urgently. And a lot of those homeowners actually don't have the cash to do it. And it does need a government initiative to get it going, to train the people who do the work, to set up all the businesses to do it, to make it happen. And it's just not happened. It's been cut right back.
Because it's interesting. It did happen in Australia, didn't it, a few years ago? And they really went for this hell for that leather in terms of insulation. And they had to abandon the scheme in the end because the people weren't being trained properly to do the insulation. There were people that died doing it because they hadn't been trained properly, and the whole scheme, as I understand it, I don't think I've exaggerated here, just fell apart. So it's not as simple as just saying, OK, well, we need to provide the money, encourage people to set up businesses, recruit lots of people, train them, and then it can be done. And then you've got the added problem that certainly in this country, a lot of properties are listed and you wouldn't be allowed to do it anyway.
Well, you're going to have to do something about that, because in the end, listing is a bit less important than minor alterations that are actually going to insulate. And the fact that you can't put a solar...
your local council that.
You can't put a solar roof on a listed building is ridiculous. But that's a different question, really. Of course you can train up the people. It means you've got to have the skills. It means you've got to have the apprenticeships. You've got to do the whole business to get the workforce together. And what's more, those are all jobs in the right places where people need good skilled jobs, where all the houses most in need of insulation are, particularly in the north. And it's a very good programme for work, for skills, for employment, for good jobs, as well as for the environment. And this government has just cut the whole thing off.
Alec Shelbrooke.
I mean, it's quite a complex question, really. I mean, I remember talking about this when I was a Leeds City Councillor back in 2004 to 2010.
Halcyon days.
And then we were talking about microgrids. We were talking about several things which would make a real difference. And I think, at the end of the day, there comes this point about the money and where it comes from. Every day we talk about there's not enough money in NHS, there's not enough money in this public sector, in that public sector. And that's not an argument about whether there is or whether there isn't, but they are the pressures that the public finances are under. I agree with Polly. Good Lord, I mean, I'm coming out in a sweat as it is, but Polly is right when she talks about and you, Iain, about you do have to overcome the problems of listed buildings and the fact that even in my village there are one pane windows. And absolutely under no circumstances can those windows be changed. I mean, there's one thing talking about insulation, but these are the basics. I mean, these are the basics. And I think that there does have to be an honest conversation just around planning law at a local level as much as a government level, because it is a highly complex situation.
Well, here's something you won't agree with. Most of the money in this country, the wealth accumulating by 10% a year, is in property. We have to be able to get some of that property wealth back in order to improve our properties. And that's going to take property taxation.
Just before I come to Drew, Charlie, you were at the Department of Levelling Up and Housing, and I mean the problems that the Conservative Party has when it tries to make some radical proposals to build new houses, they always get watered down, don't they? Why would that be? Is it the vested interest that Polly's talking about?
No, I don't think it is. I think there is a particular want to protect your local area, and I understand that. I understand that people might not necessarily want to see the homes built in their backyard, which is why the proposals that do need to come forward, and I hope these are maintained, is just increasing the local accountability, the local discussion. As Alex said, it's very important that local people have a say in the development.
Yeah, but they're always going to say no, aren't they?
And I think if you ensure that you explain to people that it's not just building for building's sake. Obviously, these are communities that people want to remain in. It's homes for the future, for future generations. People do get on the side, actually, and I think they do want to see their local community thrive.
I've never come across an example of a local community saying, yes, we would love 300 new houses built next to our village.
I think you'll be surprised.
I'd be shocked. I have to say, I hear it on the doorstep all the time, and the same conversation from the same person. What are you going to do about housing? My children have had to move away, and it's a disgrace that you're building those houses over there. They should be built somewhere else. In the same sentence.
Drew Hendry.
Well, it's very different in Inverness. We've been expanding rapidly over the past 20 or so years, and there's a lot of new housing that's being put in, and a lot of that has been focused on housing that's well insulated. There's a number of things. Polly's right about it being two questions, but there's a third aspect to this. If you put resource into insulating homes, you not only are doing things to calculate to mitigate energy usage and therefore climate change, but you're also doing things that can help to stave off costs and the cost of living crisis that we have just now. Because energy costs are a big factor in that. And there needs to be much more insulation. In Scotland, we'd love to do more. I think the 2019 figures showed that Scotland was, per head of population, doing 4 times as much retrofitting of insulation than England, and I think twice as much as Wales. Like you said it earlier, if we had, we need a referendum. If we had the powers, we'd like to do much more. But to bring it back to availability,
I didn't say we needed a referendum. I said I was surprised that you hadn't said that.
Well, I think we need a referendum quite obviously, and so does the Scottish Parliament, which has a majority for that prospectus. But if you also come back to what you were talking about, housing supply, there's a real issue here in terms of building homes that people can afford. Now, Charlie's a renter. The rental market is something that's been ignored across the UK for far too long. We need to be building more houses to rent and not selling them off the minute we've built them to people who are then going to speculate and sell them on as holiday homes and things like that. These homes have to be available for people in communities when they're built. So it's a complex issue, but there are very, very simple decisions that can be taken at the head of government to make sure that happens. In Scotland, we've outlawed the right to buy. We got rid of that. And now we're building a lot more houses for rent and a lot more affordable housing. It's still a long way to go, but that's the path.
Okay. Right, we'll go to the news in a second, but we've got half an hour for you to phone in and put your questions to our panel. The number is 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850. It's 8:30. Let's get the news headlines from Andy Ivey.
Sparked in the extreme heat and fanned by the wind was spread to homes in several places, including East London and South Yorkshire. The fire and rescue services in London and at least 7 counties in England have declared major incidents. It's been the hottest ever day in the UK, with 40.3 Celsius recorded at Coningsby in Lincolnshire. The Met Office says the previous record high of 38.7 degrees was exceeded in at least 34 places. The 3 remaining Tory leadership candidates have been taking part in more hustings with a group of Conservative MPs. Kemi Badenoch was eliminated from the race earlier, and a final ballot tomorrow will decide which 2 from Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss go through to a vote by party members. LBC weather: a very warm night in central, southern and eastern England, cooler elsewhere. Tomorrow, a cooler and breezier day for all, but hot in the south and east with a chance of thundery showers, a high of 29.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33 is the time on LBC. I'm going to put a very cruel question to Alec Shelbrooke, who is supporting Liz Truss. My cousin's just texted me to say, can you do something about Liz Truss? She increases my stress levels every time she opens her mouth. Do you think that's a commonly held view?
Not in our office, no.
You've known her for a long time. Give us a bit of a pitch, because a lot of people... I mean, she actually herself said in that debate on ITV, I'm not the slickest presenter. No. And you think, well, given if you're going to be Prime Minister, the Tories want you to win the next election, you kind of need to have a bit of a presence, don't you?
I don't think it's about... I think there's a difference between being slick and having a presence. I mean, one of the things, when Liz has been in the department, she's made a team and she's brought people on. The people who work with her like working with her. And, you know, I have known her a long time and we've been involved in several areas. And Liz has been involved in far more areas of policy than I have. You know, I just worked on Conservatives to Cities with her 20-odd years ago, looking about what we needed to do as Conservatives in those areas, and you can always see some of that across the red wall now. But no, I think all politicians can increase people's stress levels, but I think, you know, in person, when she's working with a team, when she's working, you know, on this leadership campaign, which is stressful. You can imagine. I mean, none of us are getting much sleep, and being 40 degrees is not helping the situation. And at the end of a session, we're all very tired, but it's a calm arena, and we're working through things. And actually, she always has a pleasant persona about her. That's not all have that.
Well, we'll leave that one hanging. We have with us Alec Shelbrooke, Charlie Rowley, Polly Toynbee and Drew Hendry from the SNP. Let's go to Scotland. Naveed is in Glasgow. Hello, Naveed.
Hi, good evening, Iain. I just want to say you're my favourite presenter.
Thank you very much.
So my question to the panel is, out of the remaining Tory candidates, who is the best placed to save the Union?
It's a slightly awkward question for you, Drew. Who do you think would be best placed to scupper Scottish independence? And who do you think, which of the three would you think, we'll have you, please, because you'll be even more unpopular than Boris Johnson?
Well, none of them. I mean, you have to understand this
That's a cop-out.
But not a cop-out. I'm going to explain why it's not. You have to understand this from a position of what the political situation is in Scotland just now. I mean, the Tories haven't won an election in Scotland since 1955. You have to be nearly in your 90s or over to have voted and remember voting in an election that they won there. Everybody, is pretty much looking on at this leadership contest. They know that all of the candidates are saying they're going to carry forward the exact same policies that Boris Johnson's been carrying forward. All of them are pretty manifestly unpopular in Scotland. We were dragged out of the European Union. That's unpopular now that they're saying that they're definitely not going.
Well, Liz Truss voted Remain, so she must be your choice.
She's now saying that she's for Brexit, as is Keir Starmer, I should throw in. He's now said that that's forever as far as he's concerned. He's now pressing ahead with Brexit too. So, there isn't a one of them that sends a shiver down the spine of anybody that supports Scottish independence, because the more entrenched, the more they show this attitude of saying it's up to MPs that are in the government to decide what the will of the Scottish public should be, the more it's driving people towards Scottish independence. It's this discussion that they have about, we'll decide that you can have a decision in so many years, you can have a referendum when we say it's, or you can never have one. I think that just drives people to the cause more than driving them away, and I don't think any of these candidates are going to make any difference.
Polly.
Well, I'm a unionist, and I'm horrified at the way the Conservatives in the last 12 years have given the SNP everything that they need for reasons to detach themselves from Westminster. The state of the economy, the brutality of the austerity, the chaos under Boris Johnson, and now look at the shambles where they can't even get rid of Boris Johnson.
They have got rid of him.
Well, the idea of him as a caretaker of anybody is frankly ludicrous.
Well, he would be gone on September the 5th.
And now you have an array of three. They've got rid of the one who seemed to be most popular, not with ordinary voters, which was Tom Tugendhat. He came top of the poll time and time again, with mothers, with all sorts of people, and they got rid of him pretty quickly. They seem to be looking to have a contest for who's the least popular with ordinary voters, because they've so lost touch with normal life that both the MPs and the party membership really seem to be on another planet. And I think that's very dangerous for those of us who want Scotland to stay.
But in terms of the question?
I want Scotland to stay, and I think any of these dangerous... I suppose Penny Mordaunt is marginally less rebarbative with ordinary voters than the other two of who are left at the moment, but it's pretty marginal.
Well, Alec Shelbrooke, I imagine you're going to say Liz Truss is best placed to save the union.
Well, of course, but I mean, imagine my shock that the two contributors so far aren't keen. I mean, to pick Drew up, he said the Conservatives haven't won an election in Scotland since 1955,
True.
Which meant for 50 years Labour did, and they're unionists, so you've been winning ones very shortly. So if we're going to take those in, if we want to take who's been winning the elections, on the whole, it's been unionists.
Labour are in third place.
And when we talk about the Conservatives letting the SNP in, it was 41 Labour seats the SNP won. But look, I think that the important thing about this is that if we look at what's just gone in the last 2 years with the pandemic, there has been huge amounts of investment come from Westminster to help the entire country through what's gone on in terms of procurement of vaccine, including the furlough schemes, including all those things which went on during that crisis and still to a certain extent going on to this very point today. And that shows the strength of the union. And I think that these are the areas we should be focusing on. And actually, it depends who you want to speak to in Scotland on which coast, because there's quite a few people are saying that, and heaven forfend that I would think this, Drew, but some of my Scottish colleagues suggest that the SNP are more interested in referendum than they are running the public services, which under your control appear to have not been doing as well as perhaps you would want them to do.
I think it's a very dangerous thing for you to do, Alex, before you start making comparisons between the performance of your government, for example, in health compared to in Scotland.
Difference in my government, Drew, is that we're trying to do things, put the biggest sums of money into the NHS, trying to get on with those things, rather than saying, look, over here, we're going to have a referendum on Scottish independence. This is a common
retort from Tories. They say, oh, look at this in Scotland, look at that in Scotland. What they never do is they never make the comparisons with where they run the government, where they hold the substantial powers that Scotland doesn't have. Scotland performs better in most cases than the rest of the UK on these services with a fixed
budget.
Doesn't
in education.
With a fixed budget. Well, we're talking about very, very fine margins here when you look at the details of that. But you look at, for example, health, you look at waiting times in accident and emergency, you look at all of the different measures, how many doctors, how many nurses we have in Scotland.
Drug deaths?
Per head. Sorry. Well, look, there are, not every government is going to get everything right, and that is one thing that the Scottish government, unlike other governments, has put its hand up and said, yes, we do have a big problem there, we need to solve it. But I would point out...
But it has been saying that for many years, that's the point.
And there's major action happening on that in Scotland now, but again, some of the powers to actually combat the problem of drug deaths are actually held at Westminster. So, for example, the ability to licence consumption rooms is a power that's retained at Westminster. So, there's a lot of things there that you can say, yes, there's a lot more that we could be doing better, and I'd be the first person to say that. But this lazy comparison that says that somehow Scotland is not performing as a country, not performing as a government, when it doesn't bear scrutiny of what's happening in the UK context under this Tory government about the comparisons that are made.
Charlie Rowley, you've been working for Michael Gove, one of the leading Scots in the Conservative Party. Do you think part of the problem here is that it's very easy to say, it's a bit like the Brexit referendum, well, if they vote yes, it'll all be a disaster for them. The economy will go to will decline, etc., etc. And no one, even Michael Gove has been able to put forward a positive case as to why Scotland should stay in the Union. There's got to be, if the argument is going to be had, there has to be a sort of sunny upland side to staying in the Union, doesn't there?
There does, and there absolutely is. You'll be not surprised to hear me say, but as Drew declined to nominate any of the final three who would be best to keep the Union together, I'm going to nominate all three of them because of their respective roles.
Such a crawler.
Good job again.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. But I think if you look at the jobs that they've had, take Rishi, for example, and Alec touched on it, rolling out the COVID recovery grants right across the UK, that was only possible because of the strength of the United Kingdom and the UK economy. If you take a Penny, former Defence Secretary, knows if you're standing on the international stage as a unionist, as a Prime Minister for the United Kingdom, not Little England, you carry more weight in the world, you're able to confront the bullies in this world, and we are just stronger together. And Liz, of course, on the international stage as Foreign Secretary, will know exactly those arguments too.
So you're not going to pick... So none of you have been able to pick one, so none of you have answered Naveed's question. I imagine you're none too impressed with those answers, Naveed.
I'm not surprised. What I would like
at
to
least
say,
Penny Mordaunt was least
yeah,
bad.
Penny, you're wonderful as well. You're wonderful as well, Penny. No, what I like to say, Polly, none of them would be able to save the union. I think the union will go in the next 5 years. The Scottish government had a judgment today in the Supreme Court that their case will be heard, one step at a time.
Okay, well, it'll be very interesting to see what the outcome of that is. Saj says, stop sticking your nose in and praising the Tories. You're meant to be impartial. Have I praised the Tories?
Looking
Maybe
at some
I
of your
did.
tweets and I think you've been fairly independent, Iain. I don't think there's been any. Favouritism.
The thing is, when people only notice it when you praise something, if you're in my position, or if you criticise the side that they like. So it's a losing game. But I've got used to it over the years.
It sounds to me as if you're not deeply thrilled with the state of the Tory party at the moment.
Is anyone? I don't think Alec
Tory
would say he was deeply thrilled with the state of the Tory party at the moment.
It's a very reasonable point. I'm looking at the sunny uplands of a new Prime Minister, new government in 2 years to take our case to the country. Come on, it's madness to suggest everything's been going rather well, isn't it? And things have happened and things are changing. So
that hasn't come into the discussion at all. I mean, here is a government in total disgrace who chose somebody, they knew his character really well, he performed exactly according to his character as we might have predicted, you had to remove him. And yet somehow that's been whitewashed out of this whole debate amongst prospective leaders in the most extraordinary way. So what has happened is really bizarre. Don't let's forget it.
Right. Well, we will move on to another subject, very different subject in a moment. It's 8:45.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
The police commissioner who pledged to tackle speeding banned from the road yesterday for repeatedly breaking the 30-mile-an-hour limit. How can that woman possibly stay in post? How on earth is Nottinghamshire Chief Constable meant to listen to her with anything like a sense of respect? I would think many, many of you have had the odd speeding conviction, and I don't think that you should necessarily lose your post for being caught once. 5 times in under 3 months, twice on consecutive days. That is enough, surely, for her to go.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:49 on LBC. Alec Shelbrooke, Charlie Rowley. Is it Rowley or Rowley?
Rowley.
That's what I thought. Polly Toynbee, Andrew Hendry are with me answering your questions. Pauline's in Watford. Hello, Pauline.
Hello, Ian. Given that nurses today have been offered 1,400 and they have to pay car parking charges, as far as I understand, juxtapose that with MPs who have had 2,000 plus, and they have expenses account that allows them to pay their bills. How are we going to retain and recruit nurses? The RCN said that they were being driven out, and with the cost of living crisis and everything that's going on with everything else, I don't see how we're going to recruit and retain nurses and probably all of the public servants that are being paid below inflation wages.
What is the percentage? You said £1,400, but what's that as a percentage of the average nurse's salary?
I think it was a little bit over 4%.
Right, Polly Toynbee.
Yeah, I don't think you can allow very valuable public servants, and they're all very valuable, to fall so far behind. I mean, health service workers have already fallen behind over the last 10 years, and you can't expect them to take a huge drop of, 5% in 1 year and to take it. And the point is, whether or not they go on strike, and nurses, on the whole, tend not to go on strike, they will just walk because they're hugely in demand. Their skills are hugely in demand in all sorts of fields. They can get much better paid jobs. And at the moment, the private sector pay rate is far higher, has risen much more this year than the public sector pay rate, the pay announced today. And I think we're in real trouble. We just have to pay our public servants enough to cover inflation at the very least. And remember that they've all fallen behind badly in recent years.
So when the Rishi Sunak, I nearly called him the Chancellor, when Rishi Sunak says, look, people have got to have moderate pay rises because we can't get into this circle which happened in the 1970s where inflation is such, say it's 10%, so the unions demand 12%, that pushes inflation up again, and it goes on for years and years in that circle. We can't go back to that, can we?
Well, why are these the people who have to take the hit? We are a very rich country. We have an enormous amounts of untaxed wealth, which I've already mentioned. I mean, vast amounts of wealth in this country, accumulating at a very rapid rate. We don't tax that wealth. We'd be much better off doing that and making sure that our public servants don't all quit and go somewhere else and go into the private sector. We need nurses, we need teachers. Teachers are already 8% behind where they were in 2010. And the idea we're going to give them another 4% is impossible. They won't stay. And they probably will go on strike. And the public is very much behind these public sector workers. I think in the beginning, the government thought, oh, good, we're going to have a real culture war here about being in favour or against strikes. Actually, the public are with them.
That is true, isn't it, Charlie? When you look at the fact that the ambulance service seems to be on its knees because it hasn't got the resources, whether it's the staff or the vehicles. And we had a listener on last night whose mother had to wait 11 hours for an ambulance and then died 48 hours later in hospital. Now, you can't necessarily connect the two things, but I don't imagine waiting 11 hours on the floor helped her cause. The public do want to see people like ambulance drivers, paramedics paid a rate so we don't keep losing people from these sectors.
No, I think that's right. And I think the government set a target at the last election to recruit 20,000 extra nurses. I think we're on course to meet that target, although someone could correct me. But I think that's the case. I think after COVID, people have just seen the work that the health service do, whether you're an ambulance driver, whether paramedic, whether you're in a care home. We value the NHS more than we ever have done in our lifetimes, and so we should. But I think there are more people in the NHS, I think, working than ever before. The idea that you can, and I agree with Rishi here, and I know that might not be what the caller wants to hear, but you can't go through the cycle of just increasing wages when you're facing difficult economic times. And I think Rishi is absolutely right to be upfront about that and the challenges that we're going to have to face in the economy.
But there's a real political problem, isn't there, for the Conservative Party, because there's going to be an election probably now in 2024, so 2 years' time.
I would guess this autumn.
Really?
I think so. I think whoever wins will hope they get
That would be,
a
as Sir Humphrey would say, a courageous thing to do.
On the other hand, it's quite courageous to wait another 2 years when things can only get worse.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Because normally in an election campaign, the governing party will say, well, stick with Nurse for fear of worse. Or and the opposition will say, well, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And most public servants will say no.
But I think you've got to... all things being equal, you can have that normal political cycle, but we haven't had a normal times, and that is because of COVID, because of the tough decisions that had to be taken during COVID to...
But COVID will be a long way back come 2024, won't it? Well, I mean, people vote on the future as well, not the past. They want to, if they are going to entrust their vote to a party, they want to be fairly sure that that party is going to do something for them.
But that's why you have to be open and honest with the public that you can't just recover, in a week from now. It is going to take time. There is going to be, you hear every day about the issues in the health service because of COVID, the backlog of operations that still need to be taken, mental health, that still needs to be addressed in this country. So it is a backlog. It will take time, but you need to be honest with the public about how you can deal with
Alec.
it.
Well, I mean, none of these things are simple, are they? And, inflation chasing creates more inflation. I think, to put it into perspective, if the public sector was to get across the board the inflation rate, 10-11%, that's an £8,500 pay rise for MPs next year, which people would be quite excited about, I would have thought. And it shows that they're... I'd be delighted. But no, it just goes to show that, that all of these things, when you break them into terms of what they mean... Look, I want to try and see things resolved in the way they can be resolved. I mean, look... I don't want strike action, and I want to be able to negotiate with unions and see what we can work through, because it's not simple in just chasing inflation. And I was, for the first time ever in 12 years in Parliament, Iain, last Monday, I rebelled against the government. First time I've ever done it. And that was about agency workers. So I'm not coming from, trying to start the cultural war. That's not who I am. Never has been. I think, we've got to use trade unions, work with them. But it's give and take on both sides, because it's not realistic to chase 10, 11, 12% pay rises. So that's got to find a way which can work for the whole economy.
Drew, I'm going to ask you to be fairly concise, because I want to fit one more question in.
Okay. Well, first of all, people are struggling with inflation rates at about 10% or more at the moment. That's squeezing people on, particularly sometimes on relatively, what you would class as relatively well-paid jobs. The fact is that something has to be done. And if the UK government is not going to help mitigate people over their costs, as they have done, then they should be making allowance for people to get paid more. In Scotland, just on the point that was made earlier on, in Scotland we've got rid of parking charges at NHS hospitals, and our nurses are paid substantially more than the rate is in the rest of the UK. So we've taken that into account. But again, it's a fixed budget. It's something that's actually not within our control to borrow. That power has been denied of the Scottish Government, so we don't have the flexibility. But something has to be done by the UK Government. They can't have it both ways, telling people to tighten their belts when they just simply can't afford it.
Right, and Pauline, thank you for that. A text question from Martina in Golders Green. You don't have any Labour spokespeople on the panel tonight, but perhaps you can talk about them behind their back. A new report has found that Labour's left and right wings both treated the issue of anti-Semitism as a factional weapon when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. Has that changed since? Polly Toynbee, you wrote about this a lot at the time. I haven't read this report today. I don't know if you've had a chance to.
No, it's got an awful lot of pages linked to The Guardian, and I do think that's true. I think there was a huge fight going on within Labour, and a lot of it was about anti-Semitism. And, Jeremy Corbyn looked at an anti-Semitic poster on the wall and said and approved of it when it was a grotesquely anti-Semitic picture. Others said, oh, well, you're just making use of that to attack Corbyn. There was a lot of vitriol flowing in all directions, much as there is in the Tory party now, but it's pretty much gone away because Corbyn is no longer, a member of the Labour Party in
no, he is a member
Commons.
of the Labour Party.
I mean,
not in the Commons.
Not in the Commons, and I think things have calmed down considerably. And
you can't really compare the modern day Tory troubles with rows about anti-Semitism, though, can you? That's surely far more serious than whether Liz Truss believes in tax cuts or not.
No, I don't. I think the split in the party was actually less bad in some ways, but it's hard to say. I mean, certainly the Corbyn era was a big schism, big split in Labour, and this is a report going over all of that all over again. Pretty painful, but it really is over. I mean, Keir Starmer is thoroughly in control of his party.
Okay, 30 seconds each, Drew.
Well, there's clearly still a lot of bad blood there within the Labour Party. I don't think either of the Westminster parties have got a cohesive unit just now. And again, people looking on from Scotland just see this dysfunctional Westminster.
No splits in the SNP, obviously. Charlie?
I
could go there if you want. Go on, Charlie.
I haven't read the report. It's coming up to party conference season, and I don't think people will ever forget the conference where Luciana Berger, when she was a Labour MP, had to have police protection at her own party conference because of the anti-Semitism that was taking place.
Alec?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've not read the report. I just think it's an absolute tragic moment in our political history that in my Jewish communities, I've got some reasonable Jewish communities, are still suffering the effects of giving a safe space to anti-Semitism. That's going to take time to repair.
I think it's repaired. I think it's over. I think Keir Starmer is the first thing that he did.
Not in my communities.
OK, let's take a final text from Alison in Belfast. After the hottest day on record, what is your best tip for keeping cool? Do you want to stand up, Alec?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's coming to the studio knowing there's a desk and finally getting out of the suit I've been wearing all day.
Do you want to stand up, Charlie?
No, but for your viewers, they can see my pasty pins if I can get out of here. There you are. Is it tea time for people at home? There you are.
Come on, Iain, you're not getting away with it.
No, I did it yesterday. Is that your tip? Any other tips for keeping cool?
Oh, I'd go and have a nice, white wine spritzer somewhere.
The only thing I didn't need, Iain, was to be told that if I was hot in bed, take the duvet off. I thought that was taking it a tad too far in advice.
Yeah, some of the advice that's been given, Polly, you think, well, if people can't work that out for themselves, they must be pretty thick.
I think perhaps taking your eyes off the last painful phases of the Tory leadership battle might keep people a bit cooler. It certainly has steam coming out of my ears.
You wouldn't want the ITV debate on repeat, would you? True.
Normally in Scotland we'd say taps off, but I think in this weather it's taps on.
OK, thank you very much indeed to all of you. Alec Shelbrooke, Charlie Rowley, Polly Toynbee and Drew Hendry. In a moment we're going to be talking about the heat, and we're going to ask whether you think this is all down to climate change and whether we're doing enough to combat it. We've spoken a little bit about it in Cross Question. We're going to take more of your calls over the next hour. You're listening to Iain Dale on LBC. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, fire and rescue services in London and at least 7 counties in England have declared major incidents as crews battle fires sparked in the extreme heat. In Essex, flames spread from grassland in Wennington near Rainham to buildings and gutted